you'll need to be conscious to.
Learned from the development of a large-scale MOOC build and how they've informed the design and build of smaller university courses. This session will be presented by Denise Higgins and Glenn Luttrell. Denise is the digital learning developer currently working at the ANU on master's level online and blended learning course development. And her research interests include curriculum design, communities of practice, student-centred learning, assessment practices, and reflective and dialogic practice. Glenn is the technical and logistics coordinator at the ANU College of Asia and the Pacific's Digital Learning Project. And for those of you that are not aware, the DLP, they promote innovative use of online and multimedia resources to enhance the learning experience. And Glenn has brought 20 years of IT support experience to his current role of bridging the gap between teachers and technology, facilitating the use of new technologies to the teaching and learning experience. So I think I need Glenn on my speed dial. Yeah, so please.
Hi, thanks. Just a hand. We should get everyone to sit a bit further down the front so we can see you. So it's been actually, I think, quite interesting for us to watch Dr. Ryan's presentation because in some ways our experiences with engaging India were very similar and in a lot of ways quite different. Part of that obviously is the focus of our MOOC was a lot different. It wasn't such a technical one in a lot of ways. But Denise and I thought that we might start today by asking this question: what comes to your mind when you think of a MOOC? And feel free to shout out from the audience. Only a handful of people. Anyone? Come on. What do you think? First thing that comes to your mind. Free? Yep. No? Accessible? Good. Has anyone taken a MOOC? Can you put your hand? What was that?
The difference between the rhetoric and the reality.
Right, good. Global. Okay. So the reason we asked that question is because when we started out on this process to build a MOOC, the idea of what a MOOC was is a lot different to what it is now. When you said a MOOC, it was kind of a blanket expression for a free online course, essentially. But now that there are more and more of these in this arena, there's more subtleties, there's a much broader range of disciplines being covered by MOOCs. Our idea of what a MOOC is not so all-inclusive. Things have changed a lot. And that was something, I guess, an idea that developed with us as we continued to develop our MOOC. That what we thought we had when we started was what not we didn't end up with that at the end.
So there's lots of reasons that lots of institutions and other organisations have jumped into the MOOC arena. Some of them are for things like status, extending the brand, looking at market niches, those kind of things. What we're going to be talking about today is we're not going to look at ANU's reasons for being in there. There's probably some branding, marketing, that kind of stuff, but what was happening for the digital learning project itself. And so we're going to look a little bit more at the experiment box there around pedagogy, teaching, learning, technology, because that's the takeaway that we're taking away from the MOOC in terms of what we do with our college, the College of Asia and Pacific Studies, and how it might influence something of the culture of ANU itself. So I presume a lot of you have heard of Julie Salmon, who's done a lot of work in this arena. Lots of people are, suspect naturally about, why on earth are universities in this arena. But we're thinking that basically maybe the Digital Learning Project and other people who are involved in putting MOOCs up are like a little tugboat, and they're trying to move the great big supertanker of the university, because universities are finding it quite difficult to make a shift into the digital age of provision of education. So the things that we're learning from MOOCs, if we do it well, can be drawn back into the culture of the university and influence some of the practice there in the high-value courses that they're running for undergraduate and postgraduate areas. But as we've said, it can be an expensive investment depending on the way you go about it. So you want to realise some value for your buck, basically. For us, you said this is the first time that our area has run a MOOC, yeah? So it was straight in the deep end into a MOOC. Glenn's going to tell you some of the salient points of what some of those challenges were, but basically for the group it was a chance to immerse ourselves in something that had a delivery deadline, a set of what we had to have there ready to go on the edX platform, and it made us think a lot about, it made us have an opportunity to think slightly out of the usual business of the coursework that we do. So we had to, and it made us in the end reconsider basically what are our priorities and how we work with our academic staff, and basically how we work on our course and program-based work within ANU.
So in terms of engaging India, that's our sort of vital statistics. Kim's actually going to talk a little bit more, I guess, not too much more detail, but in the next section about that. One thing I didn't put up there, which I should have, and it wasn't until Dr. Ryan was talking I even thought to include this. Engaging India wasn't an existing course. It was actually built from the ground up for the sole purpose of putting on the edX engine. So we had, on top of many other technical, logistical things to do, we really had to build this thing from the ground up. So you get a bit of a taste there of how we operated. 11,000 enrolments, about 1,000 active approximately. Difficult to tell, but roughly 1,000 that were active through the course. But probably the key, the single biggest factor that made this a monumental undertaking for us was the fact that it was natively offered in Hindi and English. So what that meant wasn't just that we were taking some material and we were translating it into Hindi as well. It was everything. It was the platform, it was the videos. All of these things had to be available fully, completely, in both languages. Now, one thing we're very grateful, when the idea to do this MOOC was first floated, they also wanted us to do it in Urdu. We're so grateful that didn't happen, because just the complexity of having it in an additional language, particularly a tricky language like Hindi, was difficult enough, but having a third language just would have basically been impossible. So if you want to flick to the next slide there. So did you want to cover that? I guess this is sort of what we're getting into. What did we actually learn from doing that? And we've tried to break it down into some key areas. So one is the learning environment, which I'll talk a little bit about, teaching and learning, which Denise will dwell on, and then we'll both talk about the surrounds and the cultural change, the things that we're trying to do in a broader sense that we've learnt, that we're trying to get, not just done in our college, but at the ANU as a whole. So for this, for the learning environment, we'll talk about the build, the platform, and the team. So this is, I thought this is quite illustrative of the sort of things that we had to deal with. So you can see this is just one of our Hear from the Expert videos. So that you have navigation down the left-hand side there, but for each video, you can see down the bottom there we had downloads, download video in 2 different sizes, download the audio, download the English transcript, and download the Hindi transcript. So it tied in with the Hindi and English transcripts is also in the edX engine. You have this window on the side that you can switch off and on, which is kind of like your YouTube subtitle thing, but it doesn't overlay it on the video, it does it off to the side, but it's a separate process in order to be able to set that up. So you're already probably getting a bit of a sense of, just with one video, that there's a fair bit of work in producing that. Denise, if you want to flick to the next slide. Oh,
oops,
one too far. Did we must have dropped a slide.
We must have dropped a slide.
Okay, I actually had that same screenshot with the Hindi version as well, so that you got a bit of a sense. Now, this is a very ugly little flowchart that I threw together. There are 14 steps in this. This was the process to produce a single video for our MOOC, in all its parts, with all the Hindi translation, the transcription. 14 steps. Some of those steps are actually 2 steps in one, but I couldn't fit any more physically. You can't even read it, it's so compressed. So it just gives you a good sense of just what a huge thing it was to have that additional language factor. I mean, I would estimate that it probably added 2/3 of the amount of time to produce the same amount of material in Hindi to the overall time for the MOOC. So it was honestly a massive task to do that. Do you want to flick to the next one there? So don't want to necessarily always talk about, oh, what a difficult thing, what a monumental task it was. What did we learn from it? I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? We actually need to take something away and not actually feel that everything was negative. And we learned a lot. We learned a lot that feeds into our other areas of business. I've put clarity in, and these are things that I guess from here on, with all the course design work that we do, both internal and I guess any sort of MOOC style courses that we'd go into, we need to make sure we've got all those pieces into place. One of the biggest challenges we had with our participating academics, because we had 8 different academics involved, their sense of ownership of the project was very low, and so there were quite often times we needed some sort of direction, we needed answers on where we needed to go, and we were struggling to get it, and that made things very challenging. So having all this planning stuff done beforehand, we learnt hard lessons from things not working well that are now feeding into things working very well in how we do that. The same is true in a technical respect, just being on top of technical things, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. Communication and strategy, well, that really feeds back to that clarity as well. Courage to innovate, it was a huge undertaking, but it gave us a real chance to do something that hadn't been done before. We looked, there was no fully bilingual MOOC in existence before this MOOC. So it was, yes, it was a huge challenge, but it was also something that hadn't been done before. Sustainability really is about, well, where do we go from here? Is what we've produced something that we could keep going? If we disappeared tomorrow, is this material still useful? Is it something that can be repurposed for other things? And debrief with an exclamation mark. One of the single most useful things we did was we had a series of debrief sessions after it had run. And that, at the ANU, isn't necessarily a process that happens with course design, but it's now become a fundamental part of the way we do our business. We look back and we go, what were our mistakes? What did we do badly? What things did we do well? And how can we keep doing those things? It's just become a key part of how we do our business. Okay, so platform. So I've put this slide up just to give you a taste of what our course looked like. So the thing about the edX platform is it was new and experimental in a lot of ways. It changed frequently. A lot of updates came through. Things that worked this week stopped working next week. Things that weren't working this week suddenly started working the following week because of an update that came through. So it was a challenge to keep on top of that and make sure we were doing everything we needed to do. I think actually the next slide is okay, so you can see up the top there, when we're talking platform, so basically everything in this bottom right-hand frame, the content, that was what sat inside. That was all our material that we had to translate. But the platform itself, despite having been told it would be available to use in Hindi, was not translated. And so that translation had to be done by our team. So the functionality, if you go onto edX now, if you do any course where you look at the platform itself in Hindi, that's thanks to our team doing that translation. But this was a screenshot I did just on the weekend, and do you notice, even so, technical notes and assessment are in English. And that just shows how frequently that platform changes, and so things get broken. While the course was running, it was the Hindi words for technical notes and assessment in there. So something has happened in the meantime and updates come through and broken that. And so this was a sort of challenge that we were having to deal with. So what did we learn? Well, as I mentioned, constantly evolving platform. That was tricky, but the lesson there was get to know your platform. When things changed, you need to know where it changed and why it changed, and you're not going to find that out unless you're really familiar with your platform. And that's true of both technical and academic staff having that familiarity. If things don't do what we want them to do, well, yeah, constraints, but that's also an opportunity to try and find something different, to innovate a little bit, to try and experiment. And fortunately for us, edX were very open to us trying to do that, and it worked out quite well for us. And that feeds into using other tools. If there's something else that's going to do what you need it to do, don't be afraid to use it, as long as it fits in with the overall framework of your course and what you're doing. Educating our educators, key, so key for us. Having them understand from a technical point of view how this platform worked would have been so useful, because then they would have understood what we're up against. And that really is feeding into our course development now. We need the academic staff that we're working with to have that familiarity. And then I've sort of stressed testing there. That's so critical as well, and that's something that's become also a fundamental part of the way we do our business, because we did a huge amount of testing ourselves. We did some beta testing, which we had limited time doing. But even with all the testing we did, or the amount of times we looked at material, when the course went live, things still broke. Our students still found things that weren't working perfectly. And so that level of testing, you can never do too much testing, in my opinion. Obviously, you don't have that luxury, but you can never do too much, I think. Okay, so finally in our team, so again, looking at sort of from the, I guess from a technical point of view, so ownership was a real issue, not just with our academic staff, but also making sure the division of labour in a team is clear, who's doing what the timeframes are for that sort of thing. I mean, this isn't rocket science, this is something that we all know how to do, but it's good to get those reminders from time to time. Also having a diverse range of skills in a team doing this sort of development. We were very fortunate and we had a fantastic team with a really broad range of skills that meant that, you know, if we were struggling with something, we usually had someone who knew how to fix it relatively easily. And also that it's a collaborative thing, and I put that in there not just from within a technical team, because obviously a technical team will work on things collaboratively, but from my perspective, that collaboration really is academic plus development team. And that's something that we need to work on a little more stringently, is making academic staff realise that we are part of their team as well. We've got as much at stake here as they do in developing these sorts of things. Commitment, again, makes perfect sense. Shared sense of quality and standards, that's something now we are formalising. You know, a lot of the things that we did in Engaging India, we did for the first time. We weren't really sure how it was going to work, but the lessons that we learnt from doing that now, we're developing standards in video production, we're developing standards in, equitable standards in terms of the physical, the written material that we produce. And the key thing, the team learnt, and the team in a broader sense, everyone who was working on it, we learnt so many lessons. And that was really probably the biggest benefit as a team that we got, was that every day was a learning curve, and it's fed into so much of what we do now.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we learned around teaching and learning, which is, you know, the core business for why the Digital Learning Project exists. We're there to support teaching and learning. Basically, as Glenn has already said, we had eight academic staff who were involved with the project. Basically, 2 staff were the anchor people for the project. They were the people who did the top and tailing. Welcome to this week of the course. This is what we're covering with the topic. And at the end of the week, they would then summarise what had happened in the discussion forums. We also had 4 staff who were e-moderators, 2 PhD students and a couple of students who were at undergraduate level, which we did a lot of work with to support them being able to undertake that role. So what I want to say is, with the teaching presence in the course, in the MOOC, basically academics thought their role was simply to do the video, do the lecture, the mini lectures that we cut up, that we put up there as content, conceptual knowledge for students to consume. They did not see themselves needing to be involved in anything else, the discussion forums, perhaps not even in some cases actually undertaking the quizzes or helping us with the assessment formulation. Now, this might not be a big challenge, except we were having, you know, 8 different disciplinary lenses for the Engaging India. We were looking at it through the lens of politics, anthropology, economics, policy. There's just a lot of different lenses being brought to bear, disciplinary lenses, so there are lots of complications. And as Glenn alluded to, we had to make a lot of decisions on our feet, becoming mini experts in some areas fairly quickly to make something useful happen in those arenas. And often the course, the two staff who were the academic staff underpinning the program, said that they felt dislocated from students because they're not getting all those cues that Amanda was talking about earlier, the face-to-face stuff about what's happening. All that stuff wasn't happening for them. We did a lot of work with providing a whole lot of surround material, scaffolding material for students to help them in this environment, because it was a multidisciplinary lens we're asking them to use in this context, and there aren't that many. It's growing, but humanities and social sciences aren't common still in this domain. And what we were doing was having to work with a platform that was more geared towards quiz-based assessment. So we had to think a little bit, how can we support students to engage and to learn from each other, because we were interested in building on multiple perspectives as a way of enriching their learning. So yeah, there was some challenges, which I'll now go into a bit more detail of that. Most people would know that there are 2 forms of MOOC, X MOOCs and C MOOCs, and that's kind of an old binary that doesn't apply anymore. But basically, MOOC platforms tend to be geared towards quiz-based assessment because it's easier when you're dealing with lots of numbers of people, multiple choice, true, false, discussion forums, peer self-assessment, that kind of stuff. So what we did is we used those capabilities within the system, but then we built on top of that some other stuff that was around self-reporting on their reflection activities and some metacognitive reflection-based project work in the course. We made no assumption in this course about students having any background or any knowledge. We made it explicit, we hope, what our expectations were of their engagement, of their learning, and we provided as much surround there to help them with their social presence, their learning about their own learning, and basically the content knowledge that they were engaging with. This is the kind of information that we're trying to get to them. There were 3 levels, 3 areas, arenas of engagement we were expecting them to occupy. So what did we get out of all of this? We got that basically academics and students, both cohorts, don't get that there's a different skill set at work in this arena. You simply just can't take what happens in a physical classroom situation and expect it to be the same in an online world. It's not. That neither of them, or some of them get, but to different levels, and particularly the teaching staff don't get the importance of teaching presence, particularly in a humanities and social sciences course online. They're there, people are coming along because they're investing, yes, an expert opinion, but they also want to have a bit of a dialogue with that person. They want to use the dialogic frame to engage with that form of knowledge. And that basically in any of these environments with the shift to more active learning strategies, we're actually focusing not so much on content, but on teaching people thinking skills and developing them to be self-motivated, self-regulated learners. That's part of our agenda. So those 3 domains, social, teaching, cognitive presence, they're 3 areas that we're really interested in now in terms of how we're structuring our work in the college. I won't let you deal with my messy writing. We'll go into looking at, well, what does it mean for teaching? It means for teaching staff, basically, they've got to think about presence more, and I know Amanda's just had a workshop on this, but we're thinking about basically that it's not the sage on the stage. You've all heard this before, and it's become a bit of a kind of cliche, but it does mean that you do need to expand your repertoire of skills, basically. You need to think about ways of not just presenting information in a monologue, that you're creating some dialogic processes, that you're acting as a facilitator, in effect, that you're actually facilitating their learning, because you've got the expertise to guide them, to see where they've got shortfalls in understanding, where they might need supplementary material. And these areas of design, assess, instruct, most academics are familiar with that. They're not so familiar with the idea of interaction, and they're not so good always at communication either in that domain. What does it mean for students and learning? Well, again, it's the same framework. It's a dialogic framework, and we want them to be engaged learners. It's a much more participative model. They just can't sit back and be passive consumers of knowledge. They need to be able to self-regulate. As the previous speaker was talking about, a lot of the people who successfully finish the MOOCs are people who are already self-regulated learners. They know how to manage their learning. Now, a lot of the students coming into university at undergraduate level or people returning to masters-based coursework haven't got those immediate skills. We've got to do some developmental work with them to build that capacity. They have to be able to do all these things, peer and self-assessment, because if they're involved in their own assessment, they're learning about how they learn, and they start to understand issues of quality in learning. And more importantly, we want them to be able to collaborate and connect, because connecting with other people is tapping into networks of information and knowledge, and it's learning to work with other people to build knowledge. That's a really important concept. So what are we doing? We're spending a whole lot of time with academic staff in a range of ways. We've just had our annual Teaching and Learning Showcase to talk about what's happening, what opportunities, what best practices around, or just good practice or interesting changes that people are engaged in. We've got a professional development program we've just launched that we're running that's looking at different skill needs people might have. We provide some coaching and advice on providing learning resources, printable guides online. We provide feedback within the course from students for staff to get a sense, like when students come in, what are their learning needs? What are they expecting to learn? What have they learnt previously? What do they think at the end of the course about those things? and we're deeply, deeply involved as much as we can possibly be with the planning processes for courses. We want to get in right up front and help you to work through the ideas of what you're wanting your students to take away from this course. And if we can be as explicit as possible about that and really unpack it, it means we can develop a whole lot of valuable resources to support student learning. And in some cases, we've had a little bit of support lately from some senior management people about thinking about the idea of academic boot camp for online learning or for blended learning, because there's no incentives in university if you're a research academic. And why do I need to worry about my teaching? I'm not getting any rewards for that. So we need some incentives from within the institution to encourage staff to make some transitions. It's adding on to their core content expertise and their abilities as academics who have got broad interests and networks, but we need them to think about a translation into other domains. And in terms of learners, as I think it's been said in some of the previous sessions, we shouldn't make assumption about these digital natives. In fact, in a teaching and learning environment, students flounder just often as much as academic staff, particularly students who are older, who are already engaged in professional work and who are coming back to study. Most students, either they're undergraduates and they've been basically very busy doing their social networking and twittering, don't understand how to use some of these tools.